For a long time, support in Wizardry for Daphne was pretty easy to understand. If you needed healing, you brought a priest. If you needed status cures, you brought a priest. If you needed buffs, safety, and someone to drag your party back from the edge when the dungeon started going badly, the answer was usually still priest. Maybe that priest was Alice. Maybe it was Sherli or not. Maybe it was another character you invested into the role. But the idea was simple. Priest was not just a healer. Priest was a support class. It healed, it cured, it stabilized the party, it gave you the safety net that made long dungeons runs feel manageable. So for a while, the support question was not that complicated. Support basically meant priest. Then healer came out. And suddenly support stopped being one job because healer did not arrive as priest 2.0. Healer brought a different kind of support. Incense, tinctures, status prevention, surging life tincture, life binding tincture, reactive healing. And after Camille and Anemone, the obvious question becomes, can healer replace priest? And honestly, I think that question makes sense. Because for the longest time, priest was support. So when a class literally called healer shows up, of course, people ask if the old support class is getting replaced. But I think the answer is not just a yes or no, because replace priest can mean a lot of different things. Replace priest as the main healer, replace priest as a status support, replace priest as a general buffer, replace the second caster slot, replace Alice specifically? Those are not the same question. So in this video, I want to talk about what actually happened to support. Not as a tier list, not as healer good, priest dead, but as a role shift. Because I do not think healer made priest obsolete. I think healer made support more complicated. The first thing to understand is that priest and healer do not solve the same support problem. Priest is mostly about recovery. Damage happens, priest heals it. Status happens, priest cures it. The party falls apart, priest tries to pull it back together. Healer is more about prevention and disaster insurance. Healer asks, how do I stop this from becoming a disaster in the first place? That is why the simple priest for exploration, healer for bossing take is not completely wrong, but it is too shallow. Exploration is not one kind of problem. Exploration can mean long dungeon floors, MP pressure, random mobs, status spam, traps, ship damage, or suddenly meeting something that deletes your party because Wizardry's codes woke up and chose violence. So I think the better split is this. Priest is better when problems are frequent but recoverable. Healer is better when problems are catastrophic and need to be prevented before they happen. If someone gets poisoned, priest can cure that efficiently. If one or two people get paralyzed, priest can clean that up. If the problem is long-term recovery, priest still has a strong argument. But if the problem is sleep, stun, charm, confusion, bind, or anything that stops your character from acting, then curing it afterward might be too late. If your support loses their turn, or if your DPS loses tempo, the damage may already be done. That is where healer starts to make sense. Healer is not always about healing more. Healer is about preventing the fight from collapsing. And this is even more obvious in boss fights. If a boss one-shots someone, raw healing after the hit does not matter. The question is not, how much can I heal afterward? The question is, can I survive the hit at all? That is where tools like Surging Life Tincture matter. If the healing can increase max HP, create pseudo barrier value, or set up survival tools before the big hit, that can matter more than the bigger heal afterward. So the cleanest way I see it is, priest fixes damage, healer prevents disasters. But here is the part that I think matters most. Healer is not always replacing your main priest. A lot of the time, healer is competing for a second caster slot. Before healer, many players already ran two caster style support units in the background. Priest plus mage, priest plus priest, mage plus mage with Magios or Dios inherited, or hybrid units that could access both priest and mage tools naturally. The logic was simple. If one caster can heal one row and another caster can heal the other row, losing becomes much harder. Double Magios access is very strong, so support was already split before healer came out. Healer just gives that second caster slot a new option. Instead of your second caster being mage, second priest, or priest-mage hybrid, it can now be healer. That is why I think healer is better understood as an off healer or off support. Your main priest still can handle recovery, buffs, and general stability. Your healer can handle incense, prevention, tinctures, and emergency survival. That is very different from saying healer replaces priest. It's more like healer competes with mage, second priest, or hybrid caster for the second support slot. That is also explained why just run both is not really a cop-out. Priest and healer are not doing the exact same job. Priest gives you the stable support foundation, healer gives you the extra prevention layer. Together, they cover different failure points. This is where we need to separate the caster roles properly. Priest is the recovery and core buff side. Priest brings healing, cures, survivability, and important boss buffs like Portal, Macalto, Asolotu, and similar tools depending on your setup. Mage is not really the buff side. Mage is more about debuffs, control, and softening enemies. Things like Battlegraph, Morlist, and other debuff tools help your party kill faster or survive by making the enemy less dangerous. So mage support is not, I heal better than priest. Mage support is, I make the enemy easier to kill. And in the tempo meta, that matters. If your fighter, samurai, or yuzu can kill after the mage softens the enemy, that is still support. Then healer enters as a third lane. Healer is not mainly replacing priest core buffs. Healer brings prevention, status coverage, tinctures, surging life, life binding, emergency tools. So support triangle looks like this. Priest handles recovery and core buffs, mage handles debuffs and enemy softening, and healer handles prevention and disaster insurance. That is why can healer replace priest is too narrow. The system is flexible enough that you can run many support combinations. Priest plus mage, priest plus healer, mage plus healer, or even 3 caster style supports if your team can afford it. But if you only bring one support unit, that is where things get harder unless you really know what your party is doing. So the real question is not who is the healer, it is how is support divided across the team. Inheritance makes this even messier. At low investment, priest is easier. Priest starts with a more of a classic support package: healing, status cures, core buffs, recovery, row healing, general safety. Priest is plug and play. Healer usually needs more investment. But once inheritance enters the discussion, the gap changes. Healer can inherit many priest-like tools. Magios can be inherited if you are willing to spend a slot. Some buffs, debuffs, and utility can be inherited through books or adventurers. So healer can become more priest-like over time, but priest cannot become healer-like in the same way. Priest cannot inherit incense, priest cannot inherit surging life tincture, priest cannot inherit life binding tincture. Priest cannot fully copy the healer prevention package. So the inheritance argument is asymmetrical. Healer can borrow pieces of priest. Priest cannot borrow the core identity of healer. But treatment inheritance also changes something else. Treatment is not only useful for healer, treatment can let high magic characters help with healing too. Mages can use their magic stat to contribute recovery. Samurai may also contribute depending on build and stat spread. So healing can become distributed across the party. That means support is no longer always one character's job. Your main support does not need to answer every small emergency alone. Your second caster can help. Your high magic unit can help. Your healer can focus on prevention. Your priest can focus on core recovery and buffs. But there is a cost. Having the tool is not the same as having the turn to use it. Healer can become very turn hungry. You may need incense, you may need tincture, you may need to heal, you may need to cleanse, you may need searching life, you may need light binding. And if you also force healer to handle all your buffs and debuffs, suddenly your healer is doing the work of an entire hospital while filing the tax returns mid-combat. That is where the build can collapse. This is why main priest plus off healer makes sense. If the priest handles recovery, core buffs, and general support, then the healer can focus on prevention. If the healer handles incense and survival tools, then the priest does not have to answer every disaster alone. The best team is usually not the one that makes one unit do everything. The best team is the one that splits the support workload properly. Now, everything so far applies mostly to generic support, but now we need to talk about the giant princess-shaped problem in the room. Because a lot of people ask, can healer replace priest? But in practice, they are not always asking about a random priest. Sometimes they are really asking, can Camille replace Alice? Or if they already pulled her, can Anemone replace Alice? And before we even compare healer to Alice, we need to admit something. Alice is not a normal priest. Alice is Dracom's most favorite princess, and she comes with the legal team to prove it. Alice gives damage support. Alice's alternate form gives damage reduction support. Alice can extend buff and debuff duration. Her inherent passive can give everyone extra turn on buffs and debuffs. And Alice herself can get even longer duration with high self-inherit. That means Alice is not just healing. Alice is improving turn economy for the whole team. If buffs and debuffs last longer, you recast them less often. If you recast them less often, you get more free turns. If you get more free turns, you can spend more actions attacking, healing, recovering, or controlling the fight. So Alice indirectly solves one of the biggest support problems in this game, turn pressure. And if your Alice has mage spells, Chaldea, or Prayer of Rebellion style support, then she can become even more absurd. At that point, she is not just your healer, she can become your main support engine. Recovery, buffs, debuffs, resistance, turn economy, team amplification. So when we talk about generic priest versus healer, healer can compete very seriously. But Alice is not a generic priest. Alice is the outlier on the right side of the book. Now we can talk about why replacing Alice is so awkward. Alice is not just strong. Alice is also practical. She can be picked early from the starter legendary bone picker or rerolled for early. That means Alice can become your support foundation from the beginning of the account. By the time you unlock Camille from the healer quest later, you may already have built your team around Alice. Camille being free is huge. Every player who reaches that point can eventually test healer. But free does not mean automatically plug and play replacement. If your priest is generic recovery support, Camille can seriously compete. If your priest is Alice holding together a full team structure, Camille is not replacing one unit. She is challenging the entire setup. And the setup becomes stronger when you look at Yuzunamiki. Alice wants an evil or neutral role. Yuzu is evil. And Yuzu is not just strong because she deals damage. Yuzu's Foxfire is also a debuff that increases damage for everyone. And it lasts for quite a while. So Yuzu is both damage and damage amplification. Now, put that next to Alice. Alice supports the Evo role. Alice extends buff and debuff duration. Yuzu brings damage and Foxfire. Together they push the ceiling of the team much higher. That is why the Alice comparison is unfair. You are not comparing healer to a random support unit anymore. You're comparing healer to an entire evil backline damage engine. And this is where Camille, being good aligned, becomes awkward. If putting a good healer in the back row turns off Alice's damage buff, then you are not just replacing healing. you are breaking part of the team's damage structure. One workaround is putting the healer in the front row, but you are now sacrificing a front row DPS slot, and healers, as per now, are frail. Camille is an elf, Anemone is a fairy, and both have race-based HP issues. So if you move the healer forward, you are exposing a fragile unit while also giving up offensive pressure. That is a steep times. So healer can challenge generic priest. Healer can compete for a second caster slot. Healer can be a great off healer, but healer does not automatically replace Alice. Not when Alice is tied to evil roll damage, Yuzu synergy, buff debuff extension, early availability, and overall team ceiling. If your Alice is your main support engine, healer is not replacing her. Healer is more likely becoming her off healer. Alice keeps the engine running. Healer handles incense, prevention, emergency recovery, and survival tools. That is the relationship that makes more sense. So, what happened to support? Support used to be simple. If you needed healing, safety, cures, buffs, or general recovery, priest was the obvious answer. But the game changed. Healer did not make priest obsolete. Healer added a new support lane. Priest handles recovery and core buffs. Mage handles debuffs and enemy softening. Healer handles prevention and disaster insurance. Treatment lets healing be spread across the team. Inheritance lets support roles blur. And characters like Alice turn support from a class role into full team architecture. So, can healer replace priest? For generic priest, yes, sometimes. For priest or mage, maybe, depending on whether you need debuff, utility, or survival tools more. For Alice, not clearly. And honestly, maybe replacement was the wrong question from the start. Healer is not always trying to replace your main priest. A lot of the time, healer is competing for the second caster slot, the off support slot, the place where you used to run mage, second priest, or a hybrid caster. And if the encounter has status pressure, one-shots, or survival checks, healer becomes very valuable there. The strongest answer may not be replace priest, it may be split support properly. Main support of healer, debuffer, emergency survival, distributed healing. That is where support seems to be going. And if Dracom eventually gives us an evil healer, as in class for MC, or neutral healer, this whole conversation could change again. Because then Alice can keep the evil shell running while healer brings the survival tools Alice cannot copy. Until then, healer is strong, priest is still useful, mage utility still matters, Camille is worth building, Alice is still unfair. And before you delete your priest, ask what your team is actually losing. Because healer did not make priest obsolete, healer made support more complicated. Hey there, Anderson over here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have been enjoying the content that I put out. I've been thinking about it for a lot and I just want to get it out there. If you do like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to hear what you think about this discussion. And feel free to check me out at Twitch as well on twitch.tv/CountessUrsa. I play Wizardry on the weekends and other games on the weekdays. And well, if you don't want the hassle, feel free to just watch my shorts. Those are my clips of my streams about like what happened during my stream. Anyway, I hope you continue to enjoy having fun in Wizardry for Daphne. And take care. Bye!